In today's video, we plunge into outdoor tragedies where every second meant the difference between life and death, from a lone hiker's brutal bear encounter to a flash flood ripping through a life. These stories expose the razor-thin line between daring adventure and sudden disaster. It's March 16, 2017. A silent morning in Iceland's Vatnajökull glacier. The only sounds were the distant whisper of wind across frozen peaks and the occasional crack of shifting glacial mass. 31-year-old Sojin Park adjusted his helmet at the mouth of an ice cave, surrounded by translucent walls that gleamed like cathedral glass. In this pristine wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold. Sojin had always been drawn to the edges of comfort zones. Born in Busan, South Korea, and raised in Seattle, Sojin blended two cultures and a lifelong curiosity into a life defined by movement. He held a master's degree in glaciology, worked freelance in alpine cartography, and published breathtaking drone footage of Arctic terrain. And recently he'd spent months planning an expedition with three close friends, Minjae, Lucas, and Eli. All were experienced climbers, but Sojin possessed the technical expertise that made him their natural leader. He was the one who charted new routes, triple-checked gear, and stayed up at night marking changes in satellite imagery. Their destination this time was Vatnajökull's famed ice network in southeast Iceland, specifically an undocumented corridor whispered about in climbing forums, the Blue Labyrinth. But on the day of the expedition, their guide, Halldór, had warned them about a recent melt causing stress fractures throughout the lower chambers. There's a possibility that the fragments of the cave might fall from above. He'd advised them to stay near the upper corridors, but the beauty of the Blue Labyrinth pulled them deeper. Light from their headlamps danced off walls so clear they seemed made of crystal. Roughly 650 feet in, something shifted. A low groan pulsed through the ice, nature's warning that went unheeded. Sojin motioned the group forward across a shallow basin filled with slush water. That's when the sound came. A sharp crack like thunder echoed through the corridor. The ceiling above them split. Halldór yelled from the entrance. Eli sprinted. Lucas slipped but recovered. Minjae ran. But Sojin was mid-stride when the ice gave way. A 10-foot slab dropped straight down, catching his left leg and hip. He fell backwards into the pool, the impact sending waves across the basin. The slab pinned him waist-deep in icy water. Another chunk fell, shattering his helmet. The cave shuddered, smaller pieces collapsing like glass. Halldór reached the ledge 20 seconds later but couldn't cross. The basin was churning, jagged chunks of ice crashing into one another as the collapse continued. They saw Sojin's mouth moved once. He looked up, then stopped. Recovery teams arrived 4 hours later. Divers found him submerged, wedged between ice and rock. He had drowned in the crystal-clear water that had first drawn him deeper. The news reached their families before sunrise. The Blue Labyrinth was sealed permanently. His friends returned to Iceland each year but never speak of the cave. The glacier mourned quietly, its ancient ice holding secrets too profound for words. It was July 21, 2018. Morning light scattered across Zion like it had been poured, slow and golden, over the jagged cliffs. The sky, still pale with the breath of dawn, stretched wide and empty above Kolob Terrace Road. Down below, at a turnout where the pavement crumbled into desert dust, a hatchback idled in silence. Two brothers, Nathan and Jude Merriman, stood beside it, strapping on helmets, buckling harnesses, tightening laces. Nathan snapped a photo of the view, the kind you only take at the start of something unforgettable. The GoPro on Jude's helmet was already recording. Later, after salvaging what was left of the corrupt footage, searchers would pause it frame by frame. The exact moment Jude turns to say something, maybe a joke, just before the noise begins, before the camera catches the first impossible movement of the canyon turning against them. They were young, hungry for adventure. Jude, 22, was the anchor, a mechanical engineering student at UT Austin with spreadsheets for packing lists, backup GPS files, and laminated topographic maps. Nathan, 19, was the dreamer. Curious, restless, drawn to the natural world with a heart full of reverence and a hint of recklessness. He studied environmental science and believed the Earth could teach him more than any textbook. They had named the trip the 10-part gauntlet, a pact made on dorm room floors and summer night drives. 3 weeks, 10 national parks, thousands of miles. Zion was the last, the prize. And Shadow Spine was the final descent. Unofficial, unmarked, and whispered about only on niche internet forums, Shadow Spine was an outlaw route, raw, remote, and completely unregulated. Its entrance was hidden behind a rock fall and a stand of twisted junipers. Few had seen it. Fewer had finished it. For Jude and Nathan, that made it perfect. They were halfway into the descent by 9:40 a.m. Already, the world above had disappeared. The slot narrowed around them like a throat. In some places, the walls stood just 3 feet apart. Sunlight came in thin slices and the air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy perfume of algae, sand, and stone. Their voices echoed strangely, faint, delayed. Jude moved first, rope in hand, anchoring gear with practiced efficiency. Nathan followed, calling out each time his feet touched down. They passed rappels with a kind of grace, bouncing gently, twisting midair, laughing when the rope spun too fast. The footage would show them dancing, almost. The canyon felt alive, and they were in rhythm with it, until they weren't. A single drop of water landed on Nathan's helmet. He wiped it without thinking. Jude glanced up briefly and brushed it off as just a probable runoff. He didn't check again. The sound came suddenly. First, a whisper, almost too faint to notice, like wind moving through a pine forest. Then, a hiss. Then, a roar. They stopped moving. They asked each other to confirm what they're hearing. They listened, silence, then again, louder. The canyon gave no warnings, no vantage point, no exit path. The brothers turned to face the sound, but the canyon twisted, its echoes impossible to trace. Then, around the corner behind them, a brown surge appeared, a flash flood. 6 inches of water can knock a person down. In slot canyons, those inches multiply into torrents, 10 feet tall and filled with stone, limbs, rage. Jude reached for the rope. Nathan turned upward, his hands grasping at vertical sandstones slick with algae. The flood arrived. The GoPro caught the first impact, a violent lurch, a scream, a blur of water, rock, and movement. A hand, then nothing. The last frame, brown chaos, bubbling and swirling, where 2 people had stood seconds earlier. It took search and rescue teams almost a full day to locate their car. Inside, topo maps on the dashboard, granola wrappers in the back, a GPS trail leading straight into Shadow Spine. Rangers and volunteers moved slowly. The canyon was still releasing water, residual flow from upstream storms no one had seen. At the 3rd rappel, they found a knotted rope tangled around a boulder, soaked and frayed. Farther down, a boot lodged between rocks, a helmet, cracked. 3 days later, after the initial search, Nathan's body surfaced 5 miles downstream, tangled in branches near North Creek. Jude was found 2 days later, wedged under a collapsed log jam, his harness still clipped in. Their story spread fast. Canyoneering forums lit up with tributes and warnings. Posts detailed the dangers of unlisted routes and the deceptive calm before summer floods. Park officials added bold new signage and began issuing monsoon alerts with revised language and stark images. Shadow Spine disappeared from most online maps, but it was still there. The canyon does not remember, but the community does. And when the GoPro footage is shown in training sessions or safety briefings, instructors pause just before the roar, a final echo, suspended in time. Then they press play. It was January 1st, 2008 in the Blue Ridge Mountains of northern Georgia. Meredith Hope Emerson, a 24-year-old University of Georgia graduate, set out to hike on Blood Mountain. She was an experienced hiker, confident in her skills, and brought along her beloved Labrador mix, Ella, for company. The day was cold, but the scenic trails of the Appalachian Mountains offered the perfect start to her new year. Meredith parked her car at the trailhead near Vogel State Park and began her journey. Along the way, she encountered other hikers, including an older man with a red dog. She exchanged polite greetings but continued on her path. When she didn't return home later that evening, her friends grew concerned. By January 2nd, Meredith's phone calls had stopped, and her absence prompted her friends to file a missing person report. Authorities began searching the area, and Meredith's car was found at the trailhead. This discovery raised alarm, leading to a search involving volunteers and law enforcement. Searchers soon found troubling signs along the trail: a baton, water bottles, dog treats, and evidence of a struggle. While many hoped Meredith was simply lost, investigators began to suspect something more sinister. Witnesses reported seeing a man with a red dog near the area where Meredith had vanished. The description matched Gary Michael Hilton, a 61-year-old drifter and survivalist known for roaming forests with his dog. Hilton had a troubling history and often targeted remote trails. Authorities released his photo to the public. On January 4th, a gas station clerk recognized him cleaning out his van and alerted police. When Hilton's van was searched, blood evidence confirmed Meredith had been there. Under pressure, Hilton confessed and provided details in exchange for avoiding a death sentence. He led investigators to Meredith's remains on January 7th. According to Hilton, he approached Meredith on the trail armed with a knife and baton, demanding her ATM card. Meredith fought back using her martial arts training to resist. Despite her bravery, Hilton overpowered her and took her captive. Meredith's resilience and quick thinking slowed Hilton down. She provided incorrect PINs for her debit card, leaving a trail that helped authorities track his movements. For 3 days, Hilton held her in his van, trying to withdraw money. On January 4th, realizing he couldn't release her, Hilton made a devastating decision. He tied her to a tree, assuring her she would be let go, only to later return and end her life. The discovery of Meredith's body devastated her family and friends. The community mourned her loss while taking some comfort in Hilton's capture. Investigators later learned Hilton's crimes extended beyond Meredith. He was linked to other tragedies in national forests across the southeastern United States. In 2007, Hilton was found guilty of ending the life of Cheryl Dunlap, a nurse in Florida's Apalachicola National Forest. Her remains were found in a fire pit. Hilton also admitted to targeting elderly hikers John and Irene Bryant in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. Irene's injuries were fatal, and John was found later with similar circumstances. Hilton received life sentences for these cases and is currently on death row in Florida. Meredith's story left a lasting impact on hiking communities. Her loved ones established the Right to Hike organization to advocate for improved trail safety and emergency resources. The organization hosts annual events including Ella's Run, named after Meredith's dog, to raise awareness. Meredith's dog, Ella, was found alive near a dumpster where Hilton had discarded belongings. She was adopted by Meredith's parents and became a cherished part of their lives, a reminder of their daughter's spirit and love for adventure. While Hilton's capture brought an end to his crimes, questions remain about whether earlier intervention could have saved lives. Meredith's courage in her final days, fighting her attacker and cleverly delaying him, and her legacy continue to inspire efforts to make outdoor spaces safer for everyone. It was September 24, 2005, in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Michelle Vanek, a 35-year-old mother of 4, prepared for what would become her first and final attempt at climbing a 14,000-foot peak. An experienced marathon runner and triathlete, Michelle had spent over a year training with her friend Eric Sawyer, who had already conquered 38 of Colorado's towering peaks. That morning, they arrived at Half Moon Campground around 6:30 a.m. Their plan was to take the standard northeast ridge route up Mount of the Holy Cross, but confusion at the trailhead led them to the more challenging Halo route instead. By the time they realized their mistake, they decided to press forward rather than turn back. The Halo route was far more demanding than their intended path. It required traversing 3 separate peaks over 13,000 feet before reaching Holy Cross's summit. As they climbed higher, Michelle began struggling with the altitude. She fell behind repeatedly, and Eric had to help her continue. By early afternoon, their situation had grown dire. Michelle had run out of water, and Eric realized he had forgotten their food and water purifier. Around 1:15 p.m., about 400 yards from the summit, Michelle could go no further. She told Eric she would either wait for him or head back to the East Cross Creek Trail. Eric, eager to reach the summit, promised to return quickly. At 1:42 p.m., he reached the top, made a brief call to his wife, and began his descent. When he returned to where he had left Michelle, she was gone. What followed was one of the largest search efforts in Colorado history. Over 800 volunteers combed the mountain's treacherous terrain for 8 days. Despite the massive operation, not a single trace of Michelle was found. No footprints, no clothing, not even a wrapper from an energy bar. For 17 years, the mystery of Michelle's disappearance haunted the mountain. Then, in October 2022, a hiker and his son discovered a boot matching the ones Michelle had worn that day. In 2024, a female-led search team from Vail Mountain Rescue made a breakthrough. following their leader's intuition that Michelle's spirit didn't want to be found by men. They discovered her clothing, backpack, and hiking poles in a dangerous area that had been previously inaccessible. The location of these discoveries changed the narrative of what happened that day. Rather than heading west as originally assumed, Michelle had apparently tried to navigate toward the standard route, likely mistaking natural runoff paths for the trail. She had been just 100 feet from the established path, and search teams estimate Eric missed finding her by merely 10 minutes. Today, Mount of the Holy Cross stands as a testament to how quickly conditions can turn deadly in Colorado's high country, where a simple wrong turn can mean the difference between life and death. Michelle's story continues to serve as a sobering reminder of the mountain's unforgiving nature and the importance of staying together in challenging terrain. It was a clear August afternoon in Denali National Park, where Alaska's vast wilderness stretched beneath towering peaks. The late summer sun cast long shadows over the tundra, its light glinting off streams that cut through the valleys. Along the Toklat River, about 3 miles south of the park road, the land remained undisturbed except for the occasional hiker or foraging wildlife. Among them was Richard White, a 49-year-old scientist from San Diego, spending his third day on a solo backpacking trip, another chance to capture the raw beauty of the wild through his camera. White had spent more than 3 decades hiking and had received a 5-day backcountry permit after completing the park's mandatory bear-aware training. Though he carried no bear spray or firearm, he relied on experience and caution. His camera, always within reach, documented the landscapes and creatures he encountered. That afternoon, a grizzly bear appeared in the distance, moving slowly through the brush as it foraged. Many visitors to Denali hoped for such a sight, but park guidelines recommended keeping at least a quarter-mile distance. Instead, White stopped roughly 40 yards away, raising his camera to photograph the animal. For 7.5 minutes, he captured a sequence of 26 images. The early photos showed the bear grazing peacefully, its massive frame blending into the wilderness. Through his zoom lens, White focused on its movements, unaware that the situation was shifting. The final 5 photographs, taken over just 13 seconds, told a different story. The bear, initially preoccupied with feeding, had lifted its head. It looked away momentarily before turning its attention toward the photographer. The last images recorded a change in its expression, no longer indifferent, but intent. Its gaze locked onto White. Hours later, 3 hikers traveling along the river came upon an abandoned backpack and signs of a struggle. Blood stained the ground, and torn clothing lay scattered nearby. Realizing the severity of what they had found, they hurried back to the Toklat River rest area and reported their discovery to park rangers at 5:30 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., a helicopter search team spotted a grizzly near what appeared to be a food cache. As they hovered above, they saw White's remains partially buried in the underbrush. The bear, estimated at 600 pounds, displayed aggressive behavior, standing over its cache in a defensive stance. With nightfall approaching, the team was forced to retreat. The following morning, Alaska State Troopers and park rangers returned. The bear, still guarding the site, was shot and killed from the helicopter. A later examination confirmed it was responsible for the attack. Its stomach contents contained fragments of clothing and materials linked to White. Investigators recovered White's camera, which provided a chilling timeline of his final moments. The photographs revealed no sign of a sudden charge, but the progression of images showed the shift from a passive encounter to something far more dangerous. This was the first fatal bear mauling in Denali's recorded history, a stark reminder of the unpredictability of wildlife. While bears rarely attack humans, park officials emphasized the importance of maintaining distance and following safety protocols. White's death, though tragic, reinforced the delicate balance between human curiosity and respect for nature's boundaries. It was August 21, 2015, at Bucks Lake in Northern California. Trevor Holminski, a 20-year-old student from Expression College for Digital Arts in Emeryville, prepared for what he thought would be a routine camping trip. His documentary, A Blue Crow, had showcased his wilderness survival skills, and he was days away from joining the Marines. His best friend Sheldon Stewart, 24, from Oakland, accompanied him on what was meant to be a final adventure before Trevor's military service began. The pair planned several days of hiking and exploring the lake's surroundings, intending to practice survival skills and enjoy the peaceful wilderness one last time together. The two friends arrived at Bucks Lake as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. They chose a spot between Mill Creek Campground and Sandy Point to set up their makeshift camp, unaware they were mere yards from established facilities. Trevor's mother, Allison, later recalled his excitement about the trip, never imagining it would be their last conversation. As darkness settled over the lake, the nature of their trip shifted dramatically. Both men consumed a potent mix of substances, 10 hits of LSD each, coupled with marijuana. The isolation and intensity of the drugs began to take hold, warping their behavior. Throughout the night, neighboring campers heard shouting and erratic noises echoing through the woods. Despite the unsettling sounds, no one ventured to investigate. Sometime during the night, a fire ignited near their campsite. Whether stewards started it deliberately or it began by accident remains unclear, but the flames steadily crept into the dry brush, growing more dangerous with every passing moment. By the early morning hours of August 22nd, the situation had escalated into something far worse. Firefighters responding to the spreading brush fire stumbled upon a scene of horror. Stewart was found near the campsite, his neck bearing multiple self-inflicted knife wounds. Just feet away, Trevor's charred remains lay in the smoldering campfire pit. The fire, which had scorched a quarter-acre of forest during California's ongoing drought emergency, had inadvertently uncovered a brutal act of violence, one that investigators would soon classify as murder. Plumas County District Attorney David Hollister's investigation revealed a scene of calculated violence. Trevor had been stabbed multiple times before being placed in the fire. The murder weapon, a folding knife, was found buried near the campsite along with Trevor's wallet and identification. Despite having no prior criminal record, Stewart's initial story of self-defense began to unravel as evidence mounted. The wounds on his neck, which he claimed were from Trevor's attack, showed clear signs of being self-inflicted. As detectives pieced together the timeline, Stewart's account shifted repeatedly. He first claimed Trevor had attacked him, then suggested Trevor had made unwanted romantic advances. Finally, he stated that Trevor had begged to be put out of his misery, though the context remained unclear. The physical evidence contradicted these varying accounts, pointing instead to premeditated violence. The prosecution methodically dismantled Stewart's defense. His lawyers argued that LSD influenced his actions, claiming self-defense, but the deliberate burial of evidence, the knife, wallet, and ID, suggested conscious attempts to conceal the crime. The jury deliberated less than a full day before reaching their verdict. Stewart was found guilty of first-degree murder and arson. The conviction carried a sentence of 26 years to life for the murder, with additional time for the arson charge committed during a state drought emergency. The judge determined that intoxication did not excuse the calculated nature of the crime. Trevor's death marked a tragic end to a promising life. His documentary had shown his skill in wilderness survival, while his pending Marine service suggested a future of dedication. Instead, his final camping trip, meant to be a celebration before military service, became the site of his murder. The case highlighted how quickly substance abuse could transform friendship into violence, leaving one young man dead and another facing decades in prison. The small fire that led to Trevor's discovery nearly spread into the surrounding forest during California's drought, though firefighters contained it before it could grow beyond a quarter acre. Bucks Lake remained a popular camping destination, but the events of that August night added a dark chapter to its history. September 3, 2015, in the Dolomites of Washington State. Among the rock formations was the limestone monolith known as Dagger's Edge, its 3,500-foot vertical face jutting out. Rico Alvarez crouched behind his camera equipment, methodically locking the tripod into the bedrock, unaware that the things that would later happen was anything but routine. He had done this dozens of times before. For 3 years, he'd documented Eric and Jenna Linwood's daring wingsuit flights, capturing their near-impossible stunts from dizzying altitudes. Their YouTube channel had become a cult sensation, part aerial ballet, part Russian roulette. Eric was the showman, cocky, aggressive, always pushing boundaries. Jenna, quieter and methodical, preferred calculations over chaos. Together, they were precision wrapped in madness, their partnership built on trust and an intimate understanding of risk. That morning, the winds were shifting. Jenna had noticed it hours earlier. The wind patterns weren't strong, but they were unpredictable. At breakfast, she'd pointed it to Eric, but his mind was already ready for action. The flight path today was his idea. A razor-line descent, hugging the limestone all the way to a forested ravine. They suited up. Rico zoomed in through his camera lens, watching them do a final tug check on each other. Then Eric stepped to the launch point and jumped off the ledge. The wingsuit inflated instantly, cradling Eric's body into a glide. Rico followed him through the lens. Eric was close to the rock, as planned, just a dozen feet out, skimming the ridgeline. The first few seconds were textbook lines and precise posture. Then it happened. Rico saw it before he heard it. A shift in the trees below, a sudden backward sway. It was almost invisible until its effect hit Eric like a punch from God. His right arm jerked upward violently, wingsuit collapsing on one side. Rico instinctively pulled back the camera to widen his frame. Eric veered left, overcorrected, and his body pitched forward at an unnatural angle. For a fraction of a second it looked recoverable, until the sound came, a dull, brutal crack that echoed off the rock face like a gunshot. He hit the cliff chest first, bounced off once, then again. Rico lost sight of him as Eric spiraled down through open air, vanishing into the trees like a rag doll. But there was no time to process. Jenna was already behind. Her wings caught the wind cleanly at first, and her descent angle was controlled, but the panic was visible in her adjustments after having seen the accident. Her line is now several degrees off the original vector. She was losing altitude too quickly. Below her, the terrain rose again in jagged outcroppings and a dense patch of pines. She tried to gain elevation by banking right, but her arc was shallow and the wind was uncooperative. From Rico's viewpoint, her legs barely cleared the first tree line before hitting the second. One extended branch caught her left leg. The impact flipped her sideways violently. She slammed against another tree, then pinwheeled through the canopy, vanishing into the foliage below. Rico didn't wait. He grabbed his emergency pack and ran towards them. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach Jenna. Her wingsuit was shredded along the back, the right arm hanging by threads. Her legs were bent grotesquely and blood soaked under her. She was barely alive. As Rico spoke to 911, her breathing had already stopped. She was declared dead by paramedics airlifted to the site just over an hour later. Eric's body took 2 more days to locate. A helicopter spotted his helmet between 2 ledges. He had died on impact. By the following week, the Linwoods channel had gone dark, every video removed. Rico quietly returned the hard drives to their families and vanished from the wingsuit circuit. He never filmed another flight. It was August 11th, 2021. The sun had only just grazed the jagged peaks of Wyoming's Wind River Range, casting long, crooked shadows across the alpine basin. Light moved slowly here, caught between stone and sky. Lane Tucker stood alone in the morning chill, her breath curling like smoke into the thin air. 31 years old, a trauma nurse from Missoula, she had long since learned how to find calm in chaos. Now, she stood wrapped in fleece and silence, her backpack snug against her spine, her eyes fixed on the day's route, the Titcomb Basin Traverse. To most, the route was a warning, remote, brutal, unforgiving. To Lane, it was a promise. She had mapped this trail in her dreams for years. Her gear was packed with surgical precision. Rope, first aid kit, emergency beacon, freeze-dried meals, a GPS unit with fresh batteries. She wasn't impulsive. Lane didn't chase danger. She moved toward it with the deliberation of a surgeon making a single incision. This wasn't about thrill or conquest. It was about quiet, the kind that hummed beneath the wind, the kind only the mountains could offer. She moved like she belonged there. The high-altitude solitude suited her better than city noise. Friends often joked she was part mountain goat, born with lungs tuned for elevation and a heart calibrated for stillness. Lane just smiled. How could they know what silence really sounded like at 11,000 feet? She had seen the mountains turn too. Years ago, on an early season solo in the Bitterroots, a patch of crusted snow had collapsed beneath her. She fell 10 feet before slamming into a rock outcrop, her ribs bruised and breath knocked out. It took her 6 hours to limp back to the trailhead, every step lit by a failing headlamp. She never told her parents, but she remembered the lesson. Nature doesn't issue warnings twice. Still, she came back again and again, not out of defiance but reverence. The wild had rules. Lane respected them. The snowpack had lingered that year, Rangers had posted warnings: unstable slopes, hidden crevasses, unpredictable meltwater crossings. Lane had studied the maps again and again, adjusting her route to avoid the worst of it. That meant leaving the main trail behind and passing through a narrow granite chute, barely marked on topographic charts. That was the last choice she ever made. At 1:14 p.m., her GPS sent its final ping, 3 miles off the designated route, beside a remote boulder field sliced by a steep, rock-filled funnel. The ping was passive, just a location log. No SOS was ever sent. If she'd had time, she would have called for help. There was no storm, no animal activity. The skies were wide open, but the chute was treacherous, a labyrinth of loose slabs and shadowed cracks, some deep enough to lose a body forever. 3 days later, when Lane failed to return, the alarm was raised. Search and rescue teams traced her last known coordinates. Reaching the area took hours. The chute loomed like a collapsed cathedral, walls of broken granite whispering with wind. It wasn't just dangerous, it felt indifferent. Near the entrance to the rock funnel, her backpack was found, upright, torn, as though it had been yanked free by something sudden. Its straps were frayed, as if it had snagged during a fall and been yanked downward before wedging itself upright between the rocks. Her rope was still coiled, her satellite phone unbroken, her food untouched. There were no bloodstains, no note, just absence. Further down the chute, the terrain narrowed sharply, 20, maybe 30 feet into a dark slit, barely shoulder wide. One rescuer lay flat, belly to the ground, and peered in with a headlamp. The light was swallowed whole. The rocks closed in like jaws. They couldn't safely descend. Trying to widen the gap risked a collapse. The mountain had made its choice. The theory that emerged was a quiet one. Lane had attempted a crossing when the rock beneath her gave way. A slip, a miscalculation, one moment of imbalance. She may have twisted midair, landed at the wrong angle, and fallen. Not far, but far enough. In the weeks that followed, helicopters circled above. Drones scanned the crevasse. Nothing surfaced. Nothing moved. The mountain gave nothing back. Even climbers with ropes and nerves of steel returned, shaking their heads. The slot canyon had become a mouth that wouldn't open. Her parents came once. They didn't go up the trail. They stood at the trailhead, gazing into the range, listening. Her mother said the silence there sounded like her daughter, resolute, unreachable. They left a cairn. A note in a plastic bag weighted with a stone. Then they drove away. Lane Tucker's disappearance didn't become legend exactly, but it unsettled people. It stayed, maybe because she knew the risks, maybe because she didn't tempt fate, but still fell to it, maybe because she moved with care, with reverence, and was taken anyway. There are no villains in this story, no clear ending, just a narrow chute, a torn pack, and silence so loud it echoes. It was July 11th, 2023, at Yosemite National Park, California. Grace Roloff, a 20-year-old college student, had been planning an unforgettable adventure with her father, Jonathan. They were set to climb Half Dome, one of the park's most famous yet challenging hikes. The day started with excitement, but ended in tragedy. Grace, a student at Arizona State University, loved hiking. She had already tackled tough trails like Angel's Landing in Zion National Park and the Grand Canyon. For this climb, she prepared carefully, even buying new hiking boots to ensure she was ready. Half Dome is no ordinary hike. It spans 14 to 16 miles round trip, with the final section requiring hikers to scale a 400-foot granite slope using metal cables. Only 300 permits are issued daily for this demanding climb, and Grace and her father were thrilled to secure theirs. The day began with perfect weather, blue skies and clear views. As they ascended the cables, the scenery was breathtaking. At the summit, they paused to take in the beauty of Yosemite, sharing a special moment of awe and gratitude. Grace was smiling ear to ear, telling her father this was something she had always wanted to do. She told him she loved him, not knowing these would be among her final words to him. However, the descent was a different story. As they began their climb down, a storm suddenly rolled in. A black cloud approached rapidly, bringing heavy rain that turned the granite surface dangerously slick. The National Park Service warns hikers to avoid the cables during rain as the conditions become extremely hazardous. Despite knowing the risks, Grace and Jonathan were caught in a crowd of hikers, unable to descend quickly. Grace soon realized the danger. "Dad, my shoes are slippery," she said. The new boots she had purchased, despite her experience, didn't hold up under the conditions. 3/4 of the way down the cables, she lost her footing and slipped between 2 wooden planks. Her father tried to grab her, but it was too late. Grace slid nearly 200 feet down the granite face. Jonathan watched helplessly as his daughter fell. Hoping she might have survived, he scrambled down the cables as fast as he could, but the terrain was too steep to reach her. Unable to descend further, he called for emergency help. Rain and hail continued to pound the mountain, making rescue efforts even more challenging. For 3 agonizing hours, rescue teams worked to reach Grace. Meanwhile, Jonathan stayed on the cables, calling out to his daughter, "I'm here, Grace. I'm not going to leave you. If you can hear my voice, give me a sign. I love you." But no voice returned. When rescuers finally arrived, they confirmed that Grace had not survived the fall. The coroner later determined that she suffered a severe head injury and likely passed away instantly. Jonathan found some comfort in knowing she didn't suffer. Grace's death left a deep impact on her family and friends. Known for her kindness, determination, and love for life, Grace had been on track to graduate early and pursue a career as a high school math teacher. She balanced her studies with multiple jobs, including caring for a young woman with Down syndrome, and still found time for her passion for hiking. The tragedy highlights the dangers of Half Dome, a trail that has claimed several lives since 2006, often due to falls on the cables during wet conditions. The cables, installed in 1919, have seen little change over the years, even as the granite beneath them has become smoother and more slippery from constant use. Jonathan has since called for improvements to the trail's safety measures. He proposed adding more wooden planks to reduce the distance between them, or installing a wooden pathway over the granite. Through his advocacy, he hopes to honor Grace's legacy by making the trail safer for others and sparing other families from enduring such heartbreak. It was October 2014 in Nepal's Himalayas, where the towering peaks pierce the sky at heights exceeding 26,000 feet. October typically brings clear skies and perfect trekking conditions, drawing thousands of adventurers to the legendary Annapurna Circuit, known affectionately as the Apple Pie Circuit, for its welcoming tea houses offering comfort to weary hikers. The 149-mile trek usually promises challenge without catastrophe, but nature had other plans. On October 14th, what began as a typical trekking day transformed into one of Nepal's deadliest mountaineering disasters. The storm originated from Cyclone Hudhud, which had made landfall in eastern India days earlier. As it collided with the Himalayan range, it created a perfect storm that would trap hundreds of trekkers in its icy grip. Among the 168 registered hikers in the area were experienced mountaineers and novice trekkers alike. They came from different corners of the world, New Zealand, Israel, Poland, and beyond, all drawn by the allure of the Annapurna and Dhaulagiri mountains. Within hours, their adventure would become a desperate fight for survival. The storm struck with unprecedented fury. Snow fell at a rate of over 5 feet within just 12 hours, cutting off power, cell phone connections, and internet services across the Manang district. Some trekkers found refuge in tea houses, while others pressed forward across the treacherous Thorong La Pass, a demanding route that rises to 17,769 feet. Many of these hikers were ill-equipped for such extreme conditions. The storm's intensity caught even experienced guides off guard. Visibility dropped to near zero, with temperatures plummeting far below freezing. The howling winds and thick snow transformed familiar trails into an unrecognizable white void. The first international call for help came from the Israeli embassy in Kathmandu, after a trapped trekker managed to send a message down with a local Sherpa. By October 15th, only 22 people, including one guide, had been rescued. The situation was growing dire with each passing hour. The Nepali army launched helicopter missions, but the severe weather complicated rescue efforts. Poor telecommunications hampered coordination, while some casualties and their tents lay buried beneath the avalanches triggered by the heavy snowfall. The rescuers faced a race against time, knowing that every hour reduced the chances of finding survivors. When the storm finally cleared, the true scale of the disaster emerged. At least 43 lives had been lost, including 21 trekkers on the Annapurna Circuit. Among the dead were local guides, cooks, and herders, the unsung heroes of Himalayan trekking. Their bodies were found scattered across the mountains, some buried in snow, others huddled together in final moments of desperate shelter-seeking. By October 19th, rescue teams had managed to save over 400 climbers from various areas of Manang and Mustang. Each survivor told harrowing tales of their ordeal, of watching fellow trekkers disappear into the white void, of hours spent fighting hypothermia, of the terrible choices made in moments of crisis. The disaster sparked immediate changes in Nepal's trekking industry. Questions arose about weather monitoring, emergency communications, and the preparedness of both guides and trekkers. The tragedy highlighted the thin line between adventure and catastrophe in one of the world's most challenging environments. Today, the Annapurna circuit continues to draw thousands of trekkers each year. But the October 2014 disaster serves as a sobering reminder that even in popular trekking areas, nature's fury can transform paradise into peril in mere hours. The mountains, beautiful yet unforgiving, demand respect from all who venture into their domain. The story of the 2014 Nepal snowstorm stands as one of the worst disasters in trekking history, a testament to both nature's raw power and the human spirit's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a cool, misty morning in the Kamar Daban Mountains, where dense forests and rugged peaks stretched across the southern Siberian landscape. The August air carried the scent of damp earth and pine, a reminder of the recent rainfall that had left the trails slick. This remote region, nestled near Lake Baikal, attracted adventurers eager to test themselves against its unpredictable terrain. Among them was Lyudmila Korovina, known as Master among her students, leading a group of 6 through the wilderness she had come to know intimately. At 41, Lyudmila was a master of sports and a respected member of the Petropavel Azimut Tourist Club. Her strong will and excellent problem-solving skills had earned her a reputation as one of the most reliable guides in the region. Her current group, all physically fit and experienced hikers, consisted of Alexander Kryson, 23, Tatiana Filipenko, 24, Denis Shvachkin, 19, Valentina Utochenko, 17, Victoria Zalesova, 16, and Timur Bapanov, 15. This tight-knit team had trained together for months in preparation for their ambitious 2,362,200-foot trek through Siberia's rugged backcountry. On August 2nd, after confirming favorable weather conditions with the local station, the group set out from the village of Merino. They followed the Langutai River, their boots leaving fresh imprints in the damp soil. Lyudmila's daughter, Natalia, was leading another group in the area, planning to meet up with them in the coming days. The arrangement provided an extra layer of security to their journey. By August 4th, heavy rain swept through the region, contradicting the forecast and turning the trails into a treacherous mess of mud and slick rock. That evening, they made camp, struggling to start a fire in the persistent dampness. Despite the challenges, they reached their planned summit the next day, standing at an altitude of 25,758 feet. It was a hard-earned accomplishment, but they had no way of knowing it would be their last. As they descended, a sudden scream shattered the silence. Kryson collapsed, convulsing violently, blood seeping from his eyes and ears. Lyudmila rushed to his side, but within moments, she too was struck by the same horrific symptoms. Panic spread. Filipenko gasped for air before thrashing her head against nearby rocks, as if trying to escape an unseen agony. Zalesova and Bapanov tore at their clothing before collapsing, clawing at their own skin. Shvachkin and Utochenko attempted to flee, but Shvachkin dropped mid-run, writhing in pain. Utochenko, the youngest of the group, was now the only one left standing. For 4 days she wandered through the mountains, following power lines in search of civilization. Exhausted, disoriented, and covered in blood from her fallen companions, she eventually reached a river, where Ukrainian kayakers spotted her on August 9th. The official search did not begin until August 24th, delayed by Utochenko's inability to speak about the ordeal. When helicopters finally located the bodies 2 days later, investigators were met with a grim and perplexing scene. The autopsy concluded that 5 of the hikers had succumbed to hypothermia, while Lyudmila's death was attributed to a heart attack. Yet, the horrifying symptoms described by Utochenko suggested something far more sinister. As years passed, Utochenko avoided discussing the tragedy, keeping the details even from her husband. When a reporter tracked her down 25 years later, she reacted with hostility, unwilling to revisit the past. Some elements of her account had shifted, whether due to trauma or time. Even the exact location remained in dispute, with some sources citing Kang Ula Peak instead of Retranslator. Speculation quickly followed. Some pointed to military experiments involving nerve agents, citing the region's proximity to restricted areas. Others considered industrial contamination from Lake Baikal, or the possibility of poisonous mushrooms consumed unknowingly. Each theory explained fragments of the mystery, but none fully accounted for the sequence of events witnessed by the sole survivor. The Kamar Daban tragedy quickly drew comparisons to the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident, another unsolved disaster in Russia's wilderness. In 1959, 9 experienced hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out into the Ural Mountains, only for their mutilated bodies to be found days later, scattered in the snow with crushed bones, missing body parts, and a tent mysteriously slashed open from the inside. Despite extensive investigations, no definitive cause was found. Theories ranged from secret military tests to infrasound-induced panic, yet none fully explained the eerie details. Like Kamar Daban, the mountains swallowed the truth, leaving only speculation and haunting memories. It was September 27, 2014, at Mount Ontake, Japan. The autumn morning drew hundreds of hikers to the 10,062-foot volcano, where the first signs of fall foliage painted the landscape. The Japan Meteorological Agency had recorded unusual seismic activity earlier that month, 52 tremors on September 10th and 85 on September 11th, but maintained the alert level at its lowest setting. The mountain's monitoring system included seismographs, clinometers, and telescopic cameras, yet none indicated the impending disaster. Hideyomi Takahashi, 41, joined 8 colleagues from Sompo Japan Nipponkoa Holdings Inc. for the climb. His iPhone captured their ascent, a cotton candy-like cloud floating beside the mountain, a sacred gate to the summit shrine. His colleagues making their way up. Nearby, Izumi Noguchi, 59, hiked alone, his compact camera ready to show his wife Hiromi what she was missing. Yasuo Ito, 54, carried a carefully packed lunch as he walked with 5 other nature conservation volunteers. At 11:52 a.m., the crater exploded. A massive cloud of superheated steam, gas, and ash burst skyward. The phreatic eruption, caused by groundwater flash heating to extreme temperatures, launched volcanic rocks at speeds reaching 300 kilometers per hour. Within moments, visibility dropped to 0. The temperature soared as hot wind and ash filled the air. In the Ishimuro mountain hut, 40 people crowded into the center of the first floor as rocks punched through the ceiling. Some found helmets, others protected themselves with cooking pans. Through gaps in the walls, ash and scalding wind turned the shelter into a furnace. Outside, rocks fell like hailstones, forcing some victims to cover their heads with backpacks, later found with thermoses flattened by the impacts. The eruption's fury showed no mercy. Of Takahashi's group, only 3 survived. Ito's body was found with his ash-coated knapsack, his untouched egg salad sandwiches still intact inside a cracked lunchbox. Noguchi's damaged camera, recovered near his body, contained 100 photographs documenting the disaster's approach, the final image showing the massive plume looming over a mountain lodge. Rescue operations revealed the eruption's brutal efficiency. Over 550 rescuers deployed in a roller strategy, forming lines to search the ash-covered terrain. They encountered what one senior Metropolitan Police Department official described as a bottomless swamp of volcanic ash, hardened like partially solidified concrete. Some rescuers sank chest deep into the debris, forcing them to use duralumin shields to distribute their weight. The toxic gases and high altitude caused at least 5 rescuers to develop hypothermia, or altitude sickness. Bodies lay half-buried in ash up to several feet deep, some with multiple fractures from volcanic rocks, others found in protective curls or clutching phones and backpacks. Near the summit shrine compound, the ash mixed with snow, creating treacherous conditions that complicated recovery efforts. The final death toll reached 63, marking Japan's deadliest volcanic disaster since World War II. 4 years later, when Mount Ontake reopened in 2018, the scars remained visible. The once crowded parking lots stood nearly empty. A massive stone torii gate lay broken in 2, struck by a boulder during the eruption. The summit's exclusion zone extended 1 kilometer from the crater, while the ash-stained landscape bore silent testimony to that autumn day when a peaceful hike turned catastrophic. The tragedy led to lawsuits against the government for failing to raise warning levels. While the mountain's monitoring systems underwent extensive review, though the unpredictable nature of phreatic eruptions meant that even these improvements offered no guarantees of safety. It was August 14th, 2017, a Saturday morning in the Canadian Rockies. The Razorback Divide stretched across Banff National Park. 29-year-old Nolan Chase adjusted his pack straps, unaware that in this unforgiving wilderness, a tragedy was about to unfold that would haunt the search and rescue community forever. Nolan's world was built on precision, strengthened by military discipline, and softened by a deep love for the adrenaline-inducing outdoors. The former Army combat medic moved through life with the same calm he'd shown under fire in Afghanistan. But recently, something new had crept into Nolan's carefully ordered world. An irresistible pull toward the unexplored. It wasn't the mountains themselves that captivated Nolan after settling in Alberta, but the windows they opened to places unmarked on any recreational map. He'd found his calling with local search and rescue teams, or SAR, where he met Rachel Danner, a veteran SAR lead with over 2 decades of experience. Rachel saw potential in Nolan's calm, his fitness, his refusal to take shortcuts. But one habit always worried her: Nolan's tendency to deviate for exploration, especially when photographing unmapped ledges and glacial pockets. When he told her about his solo attempt on the Razorback Divide, she hesitated. The route was notorious: shifting snowfields, unpredictable weather, increased bear activity. She warned him plainly. He assured her he'd accounted for everything: flare gun, bear spray, Kevlar backpack, pre-logged check-ins. Rachel knew he was capable, but something in her gut whispered warnings. That evening, when Nolan missed his scheduled check-in, Rachel was already watching the radar. A storm system had rolled in fast, and by midnight she had a 6-person team flown into the high basin. The next morning, through binoculars, she spotted movement on a high slope. Nolan, setting a small tent on a narrow, snowy ledge beneath a jagged rock outcrop, unaware that the location would be his undoing. The sequence that occurred next happened fast. They saw a motion from the tree line, a flicker in the brush, branches swaying unnaturally, then snapping under pressure. It started as a blur, but resolved into the heavy frame of a grizzly, low, fast, and tracking with purpose. The bear had likely been pushed lower by the incoming storm, seeking shelter or scavenging for food in the thinning snowpack. Nolan's movements, the scent of food or sweat, or even the noise of setting camp could have drawn it in. Rachel bore witness as the bear, close to 500 pounds, emerged near Nolan's camp within 30 yards and closing fast. There was no warning, only the realization that it was already too close. According to the SAR team that witnessed what followed, Nolan spun around, flare gun in hand. The first shot fired wide, flying harmlessly into the thin air. He scrambled for his pack, likely reaching for bear spray, but the bear was already rushing. He turned and ran down slope, but his snow boots weren't made for fast descents. He was stumbling as he fought for balance on the treacherous slope. Each second gave the bear more ground than Nolan could afford to lose. The bear accelerated. Nolan's boot slipped, and he lost his footing completely. The SAR team watched helplessly through binoculars as he slid over the edge of a glacial chute, tumbling into the white void below. The bear followed, also disappearing into the team's sight. What followed was out of view, but not out of imagination. 2 hours later, the team reached the site. When they arrived where Nolan had been, the snow was torn apart, streaked with blood and fabric chunks. They followed destruction, claw marks in snow, blood-soaked drag lines leading to a crevasse rim. There were no signs of Nolan's body, just more blood disappearing into a narrow chute dropping into the glacier below. His beacon had stopped transmitting during the attack, presumably broken from the fall. Over 3 days, teams rappelled into crevices and probed snowfields, but the mountain had swallowed him completely. Nolan was declared missing, presumed dead, on August 17th. The team later said the worst part wasn't the bear or the fall. It was watching from a few hundred yards away, close enough to see every second, too far to intervene. It was December 27, 2003. Jeremy Wallace cinched his pack with frostbitten fingers and looked out across the white void. Somewhere beneath him, buried beneath wind-shattered pine boughs and a sagging tarp, His family waited. The cold was eating everything now. The snow, once powdery and soft, had turned to a hard crust. In the distance, the Bitterroot Mountains rose like sleeping giants. Jeremy knew what the silence meant. The storm was settling in. He had hours, maybe less. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just pulled his coat tighter, gritted his teeth, and stepped into the wind. It hadn't started this way. Jeremy had always been a man who believed in preparation. A decorated Army Ranger, survival instructor, and wilderness purist, he'd spent years mastering the unforgiving corners of the American backcountry. Cold didn't scare him. Hunger didn't shake him. Weakness, though, that did. Weakness was a virus, and he believed the cure was learned under duress, beside firelight and beneath open sky. Back in Missoula, Montana, Jeremy taught survivalism like scripture. He ran courses on firecraft, snow sheltering, and high-altitude navigation. His students called him the captain. His philosophy: nature was the ultimate teacher. Screens lied, comfort dulled. He would raise his children with dirt on their hands and wind in their lungs. Dana, his wife, had once been a nurse. Quiet, practical. She didn't always agree with Jeremy's extremes, but she believed in his heart. She trusted him. Tyler, 12, was just like his father. Brave, stubborn, wide-eyed. Maddie, 9, loved drawing the prints of wolves and elk they found in the snow. She hated the cold, but never said so out loud. The trip was meant to be their final challenge of the year. No GPS, no phone, no backup plan. Just 5 days in the snowbound wilderness, living off what they brought in and what they built themselves. Jeremy called it going primitive. He believed it would bond them forever. And for a time, it did. Their first 2 days in the Bitterroots shimmered like memories in a snow globe. Tyler and Maddie threw snowballs and traced animal tracks through the trees. Dana brewed oatmeal over a fire that snapped and hissed. Their shelter, made from pine poles, plastic sheeting and snow walls, held strong. At night, they huddled together inside wool-lined sleeping bags while the wind whispered above the treetops. Jeremy smiled into the darkness, certain he'd gotten it right. Then the storm came. It wasn't sudden, it crept, a whisper that grew into a scream. By the third night, the sky collapsed, dropping wet, heavy snow in endless sheets. The temperature plummeted by 30 degrees in hours. Wind tore through the trees like a living thing. It ripped one of the firs down onto their shelter, cracking a support beam and punching a hole in the plastic. The fire sputtered and died. Their last dry wood soaked through, their clothes turned stiff. Jeremy tried to fix it. Dana's fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Maddie wouldn't open her eyes. Tyler stayed silent. The last thing they ate was a scoop of barely warm oatmeal Jeremy cooked over embers, then divided 4 ways. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. The ranger station near Elk City was less than 10 miles away, he estimated. Not a trail, but a straight line through a narrow drainage and up over a pass. He packed light. 1 bar, a canteen, a hand-drawn map. He kissed Dana's forehead, tucked the children beneath layered pine boughs, and pulled the tarp tight over the shelter's breach. He told them he'd be back before sunset. He never made it beyond 6 miles. Search teams found his body 2 days later, curled like a question mark beside a fallen log, 1 glove missing, his face half covered in snow. The duct tape on his boots had peeled, his footprints wandered. They circled once, twice, then veered away, lost. In his pack, they found a note scribbled in pencil: "Keep going. Don't wait." The family was found less than 24 hours after that. Their shelter was buried beneath wind-packed snow. It took nearly an hour of digging to expose the crumpled tarp. Underneath, Dana's face was turned toward the opening, her eyes closed. Her arms wrapped around both children. Tyler's hands were still clasped around his sister. Maddie's hair had frozen in thin strands of ice. They had died the night before, hours before rescue arrived. The media storm that followed was brief and violent. Some called Jeremy a hero, others called him reckless. TV hosts debated the ethics of bringing children into the wild in winter. Message boards lit up. Outdoor magazines ran exposés. But none of it changed what mattered. The mountains hadn't judged. They hadn't cared. The Bitterroots had simply done what they always do: waited, watched, and buried. There's a trail now that cuts through the gulch above Elk City, just past the Third Creek crossing where the wind presses low and cold through the trees. Some hikers pause there, a few leave tokens. A glove, a pine cone, a folded scrap of tarp, and some, after a long silence, turned back. It was March 1981 when Carl McCunn, a 35-year-old wildlife photographer, embarked on what he thought would be a solitary expedition of discovery in the heart of Alaska's Brooks Range. He came to this remote wilderness with a vision of capturing the untamed beauty of the land and its wildlife. But a series of oversights left him stranded and ultimately alone. McCunn, originally from Texas, was an avid adventurer who had already spent 5 months alone in the Brooks Range in 1976. This time he set out with the same confidence, bolstered by his previous experience. Carrying 500 rolls of film, 1,400 pounds of provisions, and several firearms, he planned to spend the summer documenting the region's wildlife as they migrated back to their seasonal grounds. But he also carried a critical misjudgment, believing he had arranged for a friend to retrieve him by the end of summer. In his preparations, McCunn overlooked confirming his return transport. He had paid a pilot friend for repairs to a plane but had only confirmed his flight in, not out. As the weeks turned into months, McCunn recorded his journey with meticulous detail, starting with descriptions of the vibrant wildlife that roamed nearby. He wrote with wonder, admiring how life in the wild unfolded around him. By August, though, his tone began to shift. His diary entries revealed a creeping awareness that he might be left behind. "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging my departure," he noted, showing a dawning realization that his plans might have gone terribly wrong. The situation grew dire as the expected plane never arrived, and summer slipped away. With dwindling supplies and colder nights, McCunn's focus turned to survival. He attempted to prolong his food stores by hunting ducks and muskrats and dried the meat of a caribou that had died in a nearby lake. In an effort to keep calm, he expressed hope that friends or family would grow concerned and send help. However, his isolation was compounded by a fateful misunderstanding. An Alaska State Trooper spotted his camp in late August and circled it, but McCunn's casual wave with an orange sleeping bag gave the impression that he was not in distress. Later, he would come to recognize the signal he'd given was a sign for, "All okay, do not wait," realizing too late he had inadvertently waved away his only hope of rescue. By early fall, McCunn's diary reflected the shift from optimism to desperation. He continued trying to hunt, but game became scarce, and he now competed with wolves and foxes that stole the small rabbits he managed to snare. The cold intensified, and with frostbite setting in, McCunn struggled to maintain even basic tasks. As temperatures plummeted, McCunn found himself physically and mentally exhausted. In November, with nothing left to eat and his body weakened, he abandoned any thought of making the 75-mile trek to Fort Yukon. His writing reflected despair. He was haunted by the possibility of being forgotten. The final pages of McCunn's diary reflect a man at the edge of hope. Near Thanksgiving, he described relentless chills and dizzy spells, feeling his strength slipping away. He used the last of his fuel to light a small fire, writing a farewell message in his diary. He left instructions for the development of his film and requested that whoever found him give his personal belongings to his father. His Alaska driver's license was pinned to the final note, where he humbly asked for forgiveness and wrote a prayer to his family. Then he took his own life. On February 2nd, 1982, after a month-long search effort spurred by concerned friends, Alaska State Troopers found his tent covered in snow, unzipping it to reveal his emaciated, frozen body. It was April 15th, 2008, in New Zealand's Tongariro National Park, where the Mangatepopo Gorge cuts through ancient volcanic terrain. A group of students from Elam Christian College had arrived at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center, OPC, for what should have been a routine outdoor education experience. Instead, it would become one of the worst outdoor adventure tragedies in New Zealand's history. The group consisted of 10 students, all 16 years old, their 29-year-old teacher Anthony McLean, and instructor Jody Sullivan. Among them was Tom Shu, who had cerebral palsy. Though this wasn't disclosed on his medical forms, the plan was simple: wade through the stream, crossing back and forth while navigating the narrow canyon walls that rose dramatically on either side. That morning, the weather forecast had omitted a crucial word: thunderstorms. The OPC, operating under their rain or shine philosophy, proceeded with the activity. By afternoon, rain began falling heavily. But the group had already entered the gorge. The water, usually ankle-deep, started rising ominously. As the current grew stronger and the water turned brown with sediment, the group passed a high-water escape route. Sullivan, who had been at the center for only 3 months, had never been shown these emergency exits during her training. The group continued downstream, unaware they were walking into a death trap. With the canyon exit just 450 feet away, they were forced to take shelter on a small rock ledge. The water kept rising, first covering their ankles, then pulling at their knees. The students clung to the rock face as the torrent threatened to sweep them away. Sullivan tried using her radio, but it was turned off, disassembled, and double-bagged. Precious minutes lost in making it operational. Making a fatal decision, Sullivan devised an escape plan. She would swim downstream first, then throw a rescue line to help others across. The roar of the water was so loud that she had to rely on lip reading to communicate the plan. Some students were clipped together with webbing and carabiners, including Tom Shue and teacher Anthony McLean. Sullivan jumped first, making it to shore just above a dam. A student followed but was swept to the far side, out of reach of her throw bag. He went over the dam but miraculously survived despite losing his helmet and boots. The next students weren't as fortunate. One by one, 6 students and their teacher were swept away by the current, carried over the dam to their deaths. The tragedy's investigation revealed a cascade of failures. The center hadn't effectively communicated previous incidents, including a 1976 drowning in the same gorge. Sullivan hadn't been formally assigned a mentor or completed all required safety training. Most critically, having only one instructor for such challenging terrain proved catastrophic once the group split up. The victims were Natasha Bray, Portia McPhail, Tara Gregory, Anthony Mulder, Tom Shue, Floyd Fernandez, and their teacher Anthony McLean. Their bodies were found scattered downstream, some more than a mile from where they were last seen. The survivors, Ashley Smith, Kish Proctor, Sarah Brooks, and Peter Shai, carried the weight of that day with them forever. The OPC was fined $480,000 for health and safety breaches. Yet somehow, an external safety audit being conducted on the very day of the tragedy failed to address these issues, and the center passed its review. Today, the Manga Tepopo Gorge stands as a silent reminder of how institutional complacency, poor communication, and underestimation of risks can lead to devastating consequences. The tragedy led to significant changes in outdoor education safety standards across New Zealand. But for the families of those lost, no changes could fill the void left by their absence. The incident remains one of the deadliest school camp disasters in Western history, a stark reminder that even well-established outdoor programs can fail catastrophically when multiple safety systems break down simultaneously. It was a mild July morning on the Appalachian Trail in Maine, where dense forests stretched beneath a canopy of ancient trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns along the narrow dirt path that wound through one of America's last great wildernesses. The trail attracted hikers seeking both solitude and the ultimate challenge, a journey measured in months, not miles. Among them was Geraldine "Jerry" Largay, a 66-year-old retired Air Force nurse from Brentwood, Tennessee, who had spent years dreaming of completing the legendary trail. The Appalachian Trail spans over 2,178 miles, weaving through 14 states from Georgia to Maine. Completing the full route in one continuous journey, known as a through hike, could take 5 to 7 months depending on pace, weather, and rest periods. The trail cut through dense forests, rugged elevations, and remote wilderness, demanding physical endurance and strong navigation skills. Hikers planned their routes carefully, stopping at designated shelters, campsites, or nearby towns to resupply before continuing forward. Determined and unwaveringly optimistic, Jerry had spent months preparing for her adventure. She took navigation courses and hiked long trails near her home, training for the journey ahead. Though her husband, George Largay, wasn't drawn to hiking, he fully supported her dream, meeting her at designated checkpoints with fresh supplies. One of those planned rendezvous points was Route 27 Crossing, about 22 miles from where she was last seen. On the morning of July 22, 2013, Jerry departed from the Poplar Ridge lean-to, continuing north. She had already covered more than 1,000 miles, earning the trail name Inchworm for her steady determination. Her original hiking partner, Jane Lee, had recently left due to a family emergency. Before departing, Lee had confided in wardens her concerns about Jerry's navigation struggles and slower pace. Undeterred, Jerry pressed on alone. Around 11 a.m., she stepped off the trail to relieve herself. When she turned back, the path was nowhere to be seen. Realizing she was lost, she attempted to contact George, explaining her situation and requesting assistance from a trail maintainer. The message never sent. Over the next hour and a half, she climbed to higher ground, trying 10 more times, hoping for a signal. The following day, she attempted again, this time pleading for police assistance. That message, too, remained unsent. When Jerry failed to arrive at Route 27 crossing as planned, George initially assumed a minor delay. However, as hours passed without word from her, concern grew. By the evening of July 24th, he contacted the authorities reporting her missing. Her friends, aware of her meticulous planning and the structured nature of her hike, quickly joined in raising the alarm. Search efforts began the next morning, expanding rapidly as officials realized she had not signed any logs or been spotted by other hikers beyond her last known location. By the next day, a massive search effort was underway. Aircraft, state police, park rangers, and search teams scoured the area. Heavy rains complicated the operation, washing away potential tracks. Search dogs combed side trails, coming within 300 feet of her location, but the dense forest canopy concealed her makeshift camp. Just beyond the trees, an open clearing might have made her visible from above, but she never reached it. For 26 days, Jerry survived, documenting her ordeal in a journal. She set up camp on a knoll near the border of Navy and public land, using branches and pine needles to insulate her tent from the damp ground. A space blanket was tied between trees for extra shelter. She rationed her limited supplies and attempted to signal rescuers. Her final journal entry, dated August 18th, carried a heartbreaking request. She asked that whoever found her notify her husband and daughter. She believed the greatest kindness would be to let them know where she had died, no matter how many years had passed. In October 2015, a Navy contractor conducting a forestry survey discovered the remains of her camp. The tent had collapsed, and a green backpack lay nearby. Inside the sleeping bag, her body had been preserved by time and the elements. The site was so well hidden that it was nearly invisible unless someone stood directly beside it. Just 180 feet beyond the trees lay a clear logging road leading to safety, but she never found it. Among her belongings were small reminders of her final days: a blue baseball cap, a piece of dental floss, and a homemade necklace with a white stone wrapped in string. Her moss-covered journal contained one final message meant for George. In the years that followed, her family placed a cross at the site, marking the spot where her journey ended, just 2 miles from the trail she had tried so hard to follow. Jerry's story remains a haunting reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature. Her final words, preserved in the pages of a weathered notebook, stand as both a testament to human endurance and a solemn warning of how easily one can become lost in the vastness of nature. It was July 14, 2001, on the Stewart Highway in Australia's Northern Territory. The sun had set over the vast outback, leaving only darkness, broken by the occasional glow of headlights. The highway stretched endlessly near Barrow Creek, a remote outpost where Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees had stopped at a roadhouse earlier that evening. Falconio, 28, the third of 4 sons from Hepworth, and Lees, 27, were traveling in their orange Volkswagen Combi van. The couple had met in a nightclub in 1996, and by November 2000, they'd embarked on an ambitious journey through Asia before arriving in Sydney on January 16, 2001. Now, they were on a carefully planned route: Sydney to Canberra, Melbourne, Adelaide, Darwin, and Brisbane. Around 7:30 p.m., while they were on their journey, they noticed a white Toyota Land Cruiser following them. The four-wheel drive, manufactured between 1991 and 1999, pulled alongside their Combi. The driver gestured urgently, signaling an issue with their exhaust. Falconio pulled over, and the Toyota stopped ahead of them. The owner of the Toyota was a man named Bradley John Murdoch, a 45-year-old mechanic and truck driver from Northampton, Western Australia. At 6 feet 5 inches, with a history of violence including a 1995 shooting incident at an Aboriginal football match, he regularly traversed these highways smuggling cannabis. Earlier that day, he had been captured on CCTV at an Alice Springs service station at 12:38 a.m., but Falconio had no reason to suspect him. Falconio stepped out of the Combi to check the exhaust. while Joanne Lees remained in the passenger seat. Murdoch joined Falconio at the rear of the vehicle, seemingly offering to help with the supposed issue. From the passenger seat, Lees watched through the side mirror as the two men crouched near the exhaust pipe. Nothing seemed unusual, until a gunshot shattered the silence. Lees froze as the sound echoed around her. Moments later, Murdoch appeared at her window holding a silver handgun. He forced her to climb over to the driver's side and tightly bound her hands with black cable ties. Although he attempted to tape her mouth, he failed to fully secure her feet. Distracted, apparently while dealing with Falconio's body, Murdoch left an opening. Lees seized the chance, slipping out of the vehicle and vanishing into the scrubland. For hours, she hid in the thin desert vegetation, while Murdoch searched with a torch, passing nearby 3 times before giving up. At 12:35 a.m., she flagged down a road train. The drivers took her to Barrow Creek, where authorities were contacted. Alice Springs police arrived at 4:20 a.m., finding a dirt-covered pool of blood and the combi hidden 80 meters into the scrub. 4 Aboriginal trackers arrived within days, but found only Lees's footprints. A $250,000 reward was posted for someone with information leading to Falconio's disappearance. The breakthrough came from DNA evidence. Traces on Lee's t-shirt were 150 quadrillion times more likely to belong to Murdoch than anyone else. His DNA was also found on the cable ties and combi's gear stick. On December 13, 2005, after a trial in Darwin's Supreme Court, renovated at a cost of 900,000 Australian dollars to handle the proceedings, Murdoch was convicted of murder. Chief Justice Brian Ross Martin sentenced him to life imprisonment with a 28-year non-parole period. Despite multiple appeals, including to the High Court of Australia, his conviction stands. Murdoch, now held in Darwin Correctional Center, refuses to reveal Falconio's location. In 2017, an anonymous letter claimed Murdoch had dismembered the body and buried it near Geraldton. But like all leads in the 2-decade search, it led nowhere. The Stewart Highway continues to stretch through the outback, holding its secrets about that winter night when a British backpacker vanished into the darkness. It was November 12, 2018. The Bight of Abaco lay calm above one of the most dangerous cave systems in the Northern Hemisphere. The Cathedral, known in diving circles as both sacred and deadly, its tight passages and sudden silt-outs made every descent a gamble. Mateo Rivas had spent his life chasing those edges. At 29, Mateo was a seasoned cave diver with over 400 logged descents, some in the shadowy cenotes of Mexico, others in the tight, lung-crushing tunnels of Florida and the Caribbean. Raised in Tampa alongside his older brother Julian, Mateo had turned curiosity into obsession, and obsession into discipline. Where Julian was measured, triple-checking gauges, scrutinizing gas mixes, logging every variable, Mateo moved with instinct, muscle memory, and a kind of blind faith in his own capacity. Together they were a perfect balance, and they had planned this dive for over a year. The cathedral offered no official maps, only rumors traded between divers and grainy forum threads. There were whispers of a passage dropping beyond 280 feet, a side shaft branching off the main corridor, unconfirmed and unexplored. That was their goal. The plan was precise. A 2-stage descent. Julian would remain at the main chamber, managing the tethered video line and audio feed, while Mateo pushed ahead with a guideline and body cam. The first 10 minutes were smooth. Mateo descended with clarity and control. At 227 feet, he gave a thumbs up to the chest-mounted camera. Visibility remained decent. Julian monitored the feed from a waterproof tablet on the surface relay board, watching Mateo's light carve through the cathedral-like caverns. The video was choppy but clear enough, until it wasn't. Julian leaned closer. The feed stuttered, then picked up again. Mateo had entered a side shaft, its walls tight enough to press his shoulders inward. Julian watched as his brother exhaled slowly, flattening his chest to squeeze through. The light flickered, bounced off disturbed silt. Then the camera tilted hard. Mateo was stuck. He angled for leverage, feet braced. The hiss of escaping air filled the mic. Julian called out through the loop. Julian spoke urgently into the loop, telling Mateo to back out, not to force it, asking if he could hear him. There was no response. The feed trembled as Mateo reached toward his left tank. The image blurred. Clouds of silt, the frantic movement of hands. Then the faceplate flashed into view, Matteo's eyes wide with effort, jaw clenched. Julian's voice cut through again, cracking with panic, telling him to stop moving, that he was coming down. But Matteo wasn't stopping. He twisted his body, trying to turn. The slate on his wrist came into view, scrawled with one word in grease pencil: stuck. Then the camera slammed sideways. For a moment, there was only blackness. Then a final frame. Matteo motionless, the light flickering against his helmet. A faint hiss, then nothing. The feed froze. Julian dropped his headset and suited up and descended. At 210 feet, he found the side shaft. The silt hadn't settled. He crawled in, heart pounding, knowing exactly what lay ahead. Just beyond a jagged choke point, he saw the collapsed rock and the faint glow of Matteo's torch, flickering behind a veil of debris. He tried to dig. The limestone shifted, then sealed tighter. His gloves tore and his hands bled. His brother did not move. Julian stayed until his reserves ran dry, until he had no choice but to leave that narrow space behind. The recovery team arrived 3 days later. It took 6 divers and a pulley system to extract Matteo from beyond the choke point. He had been trapped within minutes, likely from an equipment failure or a surge of exertion as he tried to force his way through. Matteo's funeral was held in Tampa. The casket remained closed. Divers came from across the country, placing slates and dive tags beside the urn. No one has attempted the shaft since. It was October 14, 2016. The tropical sun was dipping below the hills of Maui's east coast, casting a golden glow across the lush rainforest, its beams fighting the encroaching shadows. A silver rental car sat parked beneath a canopy of thick ferns and towering ohia trees. Inside the car, 2 backpacks lay discarded, half-finished water bottles in their side pockets, a printed map marked with a red X. Just beyond, a narrow path wound into the dense underbrush. Invisible to the casual observer, it led to a place where the earth kept its secrets. Elias and Morgan Finch, newlyweds from Flagstaff, Arizona, stood at the edge of adventure. Both 28, they shared a love for the unknown, for the places beneath the surface. They were geologists by trade, cavers by passion. They had met 4 years earlier on a field expedition to Kartchner Caverns in southern Arizona, a place where the world's most beautiful underground formations were just waiting to be explored. Since then, their vacations had never been to resorts or beaches, but always to caves, lava tubes, or forgotten tunnels where few had ever set foot. This trip was supposed to be their perfect honeymoon, a blend of relaxation by the ocean and the thrill of discovery. Morgan had always adored the sea, but Elias was drawn to the volcanoes, to the primal force beneath the islands. When he learned of the hidden lava tubes near Hana, the pull was irresistible. A GPS coordinate posted on a caving forum, a secret side tunnel off the main lava system, called to him like a siren song, unmapped, little known and deemed unsafe by some. For Elias, this only fueled his excitement. He had a knack for finding the places that others avoided. The couple had packed meticulously: batteries, backup lights, ropes, snacks. Morgan checked the weather one last time. Clear skies, calm winds. They arrived at the cave entrance by 2 p.m., excited but cautious. The main tube was tucked behind a curtain of ferns, its jagged mouth swallowing the daylight as they ventured inside. The temperature dropped immediately, the damp rainforest air giving way to the dry stillness of basalt rock. Their headlamps lit the rough walls, smooth and glassy from centuries of lava flow. They moved deeper into the tube, following the main corridor. But then Elias spotted it, a narrow opening to the right. The GPS pin was a match, a small doorway barely wide enough to fit through, half hidden by fallen rock. Elias whispered that he thinks they've found it, his voice soft but sure, as he pointed toward the narrow opening. Morgan's eyes lit up with anticipation as she smiled and urged him to lead the way. They squeezed through, the passage narrowing further. The air grew stale, the tunnel tight and claustrophobic. This part was untouched. No graffiti, no footprints. A hidden world of silence. When they entered a small chamber about the size of a garage, Morgan paused. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of Elias standing beneath the ceiling, his headlamp casting shadows on the black rock that hung like frozen waves above them. The timestamp, 3:17 p.m. 14 minutes later, everything changed. It began with a low, rumbling tremor, a subtle vibration that rippled through the walls. Dust stirred on the floor. Elias froze, his heart racing. Morgan looked up, and then the rock groaned. Lava tubes were beautiful but fragile. The structure beneath them was old, eroded by centuries of pressure. Unseen forces pushing at it from every direction. The tremor that had barely registered to the outside world was enough to set off a chain reaction within the chamber. First came the pebbles, then a basketball-sized chunk of rock crashing to the floor just feet away from where they stood. Morgan screamed, telling Elias to get out of there, but it was already too late. Elias reached for her, but the ceiling above them was giving way. The rock didn't explode. It imploded, as if the cave itself was exhaling. Tons of stone fell in an instant, sealing them in. The light from their headlamps flickered, and then went dark. The world became a tomb of suffocating dust and silence. Hours passed. No one knew they were missing. It wasn't until 3 days later, on October 17th, when a park ranger saw the rental car still parked at the trailhead. The doors were locked. The map inside was marked with the red X, their last known location. A search team was dispatched. Equipped with ropes and helmets, they ventured into the main lava tube, then located the side tunnel. But when they reached the collapse, progress halted. Giant slabs of basalt blocked the passage. It was impossible to move them by hand without risking another collapse. Even so, they checked for any signs of life, looking for small gaps in the debris where air might still flow. They used gas detectors to ensure there was breathable air. The possibility of survivors slim but not impossible. When they reached the spot where the tunnel had once opened, the situation was dire. It was clear that the cave's ceiling had given way in one massive, fatal exhale. The air was thick with dust, and the pressure of the rock above them made everything feel suffocating, like the cave was holding its breath. Engineers were called in. A robot drone, built for tight spaces, was lowered through a crack above the chamber. The camera flickered, jerking through dust and darkness until it found a flash of color, a boot, a backpack, and then beneath a jagged pile of rock, two still bodies side by side, embraced in death. Elias had shielded Morgan, his body curled protectively around hers. Neither had survived the initial collapse. The last photo on Morgan's phone was recovered days later. It captured Elias, grinning beneath the frozen waves of black rock, a moment of joy now stained with eerie finality. It was time-stamped, 3:17 p.m., the last time they had been alive. Their photo, once full of life and laughter, became the haunting image that would live on in the hearts of those who never knew them. Some locals argued that the caves should be sealed, citing the Hawaiian belief in mana, the spiritual energy that flows through the land and its stones. They believed the lava tubes were sacred, home to aqua spirits, whose anger could be stirred by those who ventured too deeply. Others, however, felt that adventurers like Elias and Morgan understood the risks, accepting them as part of their love and respect for the land. To them, exploring the caves was a sacred act, acknowledging the kapu of the earth, honoring both its beauty and danger, and forging a connection with the island's ancient, untamable spirit. To this day, no one has entered that side tunnel again. The opening remains sealed, a forgotten tomb hidden beneath the rainforest. Tourists still drive the Hana Highway, marveling at waterfalls and sea cliffs. Few know how close they are to the place where two adventurers, full of life and love, disappeared beneath the island's ancient skin. It was Friday, March 31st, 2023, at McCormick's Creek State Park in Owen County, Indiana. Brett and Wendy Kincaid, a devoted couple from Rossville, Indiana, were enjoying a peaceful evening doing what they loved most, camping. Married for nearly 26 years, they shared a deep passion for the outdoors and their faith. Brett, 53, was a skilled contractor known for his dedication, while Wendy, 47, was a longtime Purdue University employee admired by her colleagues. They were active in their church, cherished by their community, and proud parents and grandparents. McCormick's Creek State Park was the perfect spot for them to reconnect. That evening, they relaxed in their camper, surrounded by the beauty of nature. Unbeknownst to them, a severe storm was approaching, set to change their lives forever. Suddenly, the weather took a dramatic turn. The wind grew stronger, and storm clouds loomed overhead. Outdoor warning sirens echoed through the park, alerting campers to the threat of a tornado. Many sought safety in the park's cement bathhouse, but Brett and Wendy stayed in their camper, possibly unaware of the storm's severity or hopeful it would pass quickly. The tornado struck with devastating force, reaching wind speeds of 138 miles per hour. It tore through the campground, uprooting trees, flipping vehicles, and destroying campers. The powerful winds flattened much of the area, leaving behind scenes of destruction that rescuers would later describe as catastrophic. As the storm passed, emergency responders began their search late that night, navigating through the debris. In the early hours of April 1st, they faced a campground that was nearly unrecognizable. Roads were blocked by fallen trees, power lines hung precariously, and personal belongings were scattered everywhere. Despite the chaos, most campers who had taken shelter in the bathhouse emerged with minor injuries. The initial search efforts did not locate Brett and Wendy. Rescuers worked tirelessly, clearing paths and helping survivors reach safety at the nearby Canyon Inn. On Saturday morning, a larger search team returned, this time with daylight revealing the full scale of destruction. Focusing on the hardest-hit areas, they discovered the couple's camper among the wreckage. Tragically, Brett and Wendy were found deceased. Their loss was deeply felt not only by their family, but also by their friends and the community they had impacted so profoundly. The Kincaids were remembered for their generosity, faith, and dedication to mentoring others. Andrew Bean, a close family friend, described them as humble and inspiring individuals whose love and values touched everyone they met. Brett and Wendy were humble people that blessed many people with their love because they knew an even greater love through their faith in God, Bean said. He started a GoFundMe account to raise money for funeral costs to assist the couple's family. The tornado that claimed Brett and Wendy's lives was part of a larger outbreak of severe storms that weekend, which caused widespread devastation across multiple states. Indiana reported 5 fatalities, with Brett and Wendy among them, while the overall death toll reached at least 32. In the days following the disaster, McCormick's Creek State Park remained closed as officials worked to assess and repair the extensive damage. Tributes poured in from those who knew and loved the Kincaids. Their church community honored their memory, reflecting on their decades of service, including mentoring young couples and teaching Bible classes. Brett and Wendy Kincaid's story is a heartbreaking reminder of how unpredictable life can be. Their love, faith, and kindness left a lasting legacy, and their memory continues to inspire all who were fortunate enough to know them. As one friend put it, their love, influence, and example will have a lasting impact on countless people. The Kincaids were generous in all aspects of their life. It was July 2023 in Yellowstone National Park, where towering peaks and pristine wilderness drew adventurers from across the globe. Amy Adamson, born in Alaska during the 1980s, had always felt a deep connection to the untamed landscapes that shaped her childhood. As the only daughter in her family, she grew up surrounded by love and encouragement from her mother Janet, who watched her daughter's adventurous spirit bloom. Amy's path wasn't typical. After years as a dedicated English teacher, she made a bold decision in 2015 that would reshape her life. She left the classroom to backpack across America. Her journey became more than just travel. It transformed into a mission to advocate for nature's preservation. She documented her experiences in a book titled Walking Out: One Teacher's Reflections on Walking Out of the Classroom to Walk America. Her Facebook page captured her philosophy perfectly. "We have nothing to lose and a world to see." These words would take on a haunting significance in the wake of what was to come. Amy's mother Janet often described how her daughter would rise before dawn, eager to explore. Every morning she'd get up early and she'd walk, hike, or run, Janet recalled. Running through that beauty of Yellowstone, she was almost in heaven. On that fateful morning in 2023, Amy followed her usual routine. She took her bath, gathered her gear, and set out into Yellowstone's vast expanse. She was a regular at the park, familiar with its trails and dangers. But nature, even in its most familiar forms, can turn deadly in an instant. Hours passed without word from Amy. As darkness approached, concern grew. When she failed to return, her mother's worst fears began to surface. A search party was quickly organized, with park staff and experienced guides joining forces to find the missing hiker. The search ended in tragedy when they discovered Amy's body on the Buttermilk Trail, west of the national park. The evidence told a brutal story. She had died from excessive blood loss following a grizzly bear attack. Tracks found near her body confirmed the presence of the massive predator, providing silent testimony to her final moments. The investigation revealed that Amy had encountered a grizzly bear that had been traveling with cubs. Despite her experience and knowledge of wildlife safety, the encounter proved fatal. The bear's presence with cubs likely made the situation even more dangerous, as mother bears are notoriously protective of their young. Months after the tragedy, the same bear resurfaced in a residential area, forcing officials to make a difficult decision. The bear was euthanized, and genetic analysis confirmed it was indeed the animal responsible for Amy's death. The incident highlighted the growing tensions between expanding human activities and wildlife territories in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Janet Adamson, though devastated by the loss, found a measure of peace in knowing her daughter died doing what she loved. "God is so good," she said through tears. "He took her by nature, not by any evil deed, bad accident, or bad illness. He took her where she was, out doing what she loved, and that gives us comfort." Amy's legacy lives on through her book and the countless lives she touched. Her story serves as both a celebration of adventurous spirit and a sobering reminder of nature's raw power. In Yellowstone's vast wilderness, where beauty and danger walk hand in hand, Amy Adamson's tale reminds us that even the most experienced outdoors people must maintain constant respect for the wild. The Buttermilk Trail still draws hikers, but Amy's story echoes in the rustling leaves and distant calls of wildlife. Her passion for exploration and dedication to sharing nature's wonders with others continues to inspire, even as it warns of the risks that come with seeking adventure in the wild. It was a bright June morning at Horsetail Falls in Alpine, Utah, where clear mountain water tumbled down the rugged cliffs. The warmth of early summer filled the air, and the creek, swollen with snowmelt, roared through the canyon with unusual force. The scenic trail leading to the falls, known for its steep inclines and rocky terrain, remained a favorite among hikers seeking both challenge and beauty. Among them was Cynthia Ann Grimwood, setting out on what should have been a peaceful solo hike with her loyal dog by her side. Cynthia, a 19-year-old from Springville, Utah, had spent years exploring local trails. A former high school softball player, she thrived on physical challenges and found solitude in the outdoors. Often documenting her adventures through photos, she had developed a deep appreciation for nature's beauty and unpredictability. That morning, she parked her car at the trailhead and began her ascent. Her small dog followed eagerly as she moved through dense pine forests and across sunlit clearings. The creek that normally meandered beside the trail had transformed into a churning river, its power amplified by melting snow from the higher elevations. The rushing water carved through rocks and down narrow channels, its current deceptively strong. At some point in the afternoon, Cynthia stopped near the water's edge. Whether she was cooling off, refilling her water bottle, or capturing a video of the cascading falls remained uncertain. What was known came later, when rescuers recovered her phone. A final recording showed her standing near the creek, the roar of the water in the background. Then, in an instant, she was gone, swept away by the powerful current. Around 3 p.m., two hikers approaching the falls came across an unsettling scene. A small dog stood alone by the water, distressed and unwilling to leave. Nearby, a phone and scattered personal belongings lay abandoned. Cynthia was nowhere in sight. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the hikers quickly alerted emergency services. Within hours, search teams arrived. The Utah County Sheriff's Office coordinated with firefighters and a helicopter crew from the Utah Department of Public Safety. But the swollen creek complicated rescue efforts. The force of the water had carried her downstream, and as night fell, the search had to be suspended. Early the next morning, rescuers located Cynthia's body, trapped beneath fallen trees along the river's course. Recovery teams carefully navigated the hazardous terrain to bring her back. The medical examiner later confirmed that she had drowned, with no signs of foul play. Her faithful dog, who had refused to leave the area, was safely returned to her grieving family. The tragedy was not an isolated event. Just one day later, a 12-year-old boy was swept away in the Provo River near Bridal Veil Falls. Though pulled from the water within minutes, he did not survive. The back-to-back incidents served as stark reminders of the deadly force of mountain waterways, particularly during snowmelt season. Local officials urged caution, warning hikers about the hidden dangers of seemingly calm streams. Beneath their surface, Cold temperatures and powerful currents could turn a brief moment of carelessness into a fatal mistake. Cynthia's story remains a sobering testament to nature's unpredictability. Her final video, meant to capture the beauty of the falls, became an unintentional record of the thin line between adventure and tragedy. The trail to Horsetail Falls still draws hikers, but many now pause at the water's edge, reminded that even the most familiar paths can hold unexpected dangers. It was August 9, 2019. Along Italy's southern coastline near Policastro Busentino, Simon Gauthier, a 27-year-old French art history student, was exploring the untamed beauty of the Mediterranean coast. After 2 years of living in Rome working on his thesis, he had grown familiar with Italy's terrain. That morning, he set out from Policastro Busentino, planning a challenging trek toward Naples. Before departing, he sent his family a photograph of his backpack. The rugged terrain of Belvedere di Ciolandrea presented a formidable challenge. The area's network of paths wound through dramatic cliffs and unstable ground, where the distance between safety and disaster measured mere inches. The morning sun cast long shadows across the limestone cliffs as Gauthier made his way along the coastal trail. The accident occurred without witnesses. Navigating the treacherous terrain, Gauthier lost his footing and fell. The impact shattered both legs, and the fall's severity severed a major artery. At 9 a.m., he managed to place a call to 118, Italy's emergency response number. The sea was visible from his position, but the vast coastline offered no distinct markers for rescuers. Italy's emergency response system revealed its critical limitations. The existing technology could only triangulate positions within 2 kilometers in urban areas and up to 20 kilometers in rural regions. In contrast, the advanced mobile location system, mandated by EU directives but never implemented in Italy, could pinpoint locations with thousand-fold greater precision, narrowing searches to within 2 meters. The search area sprawled across 140 square kilometers of rugged coastline. Over 170 emergency responders deployed, including specialized alpine rescue teams, firefighters, and helicopter units. They employed drones, binoculars, and bloodhounds, but the challenging landscape hindered their efforts. Medical examiners would later determine that Gauthier had died approximately 40 to 45 minutes after his emergency call, his severed artery causing rapid blood loss. For 9 days, rescue teams combed the coastline. On August 19th, a breakthrough came when rescuers spotted Gauthier's backpack through binoculars. Following traces of blood, they discovered his body in a ravine near Belvedere di Ciolandre. The location, 6 miles south of the Narrows, lay within the vast initial search area, but the terrain's complexity had concealed him from earlier search efforts. The tragedy exposed the consequences of Italy's delayed implementation of modern emergency location systems. While 12 European countries had already adopted AML technology, Italy's emergency services relied on outdated methods. The 118 emergency systems limitations meant that rescuers had searched an area nearly the size of a small city, while modern systems could have narrowed the search to the space of a parking spot. That evening, locals gathered for a vigil at the Church of the Immaculate in Scario, the closest village to where Gauthier was found. The Italian Emergency Response Network faced intense scrutiny over its delayed implementation of EU geolocation directives. The president of the 118 system acknowledged that modern technology could have led rescuers directly to Gauthier's location, potentially preventing his death. Gauthier's body was returned to France while the cliffs of Belvedere di Ciolandrea stood as a testament to how technological negligence had transformed a survivable accident into a fatal tragedy. The paths still draw hikers, but Gauthier's final journey forced Italy to confront its outdated emergency response capabilities. It was July 22, 2018, a Wednesday morning in Orderville, Utah. The desert air was hot and dry, and the steep canyon walls were quiet and everything seemed calm. But deep in one of the park's narrow canyons, something deadly was coming, and no one saw it yet. 24-year-old Clara Min had an engineering mind, calculating risks with the same precision she applied to her studies. Her world was built on careful planning, weather apps checked obsessively, backup gear for every scenario, contingency plans rehearsed. She was pursuing her master's in structural engineering, but the canyon walls called to her more than campus laboratories. However, That July morning, something shifted in Clara's usually cautious approach. The forecast showed scattered storms in distant mountains, yet Utah remained bone dry. The ground was hard-packed, the sky crystalline blue. She and her 3 friends had been planning this adventure for more than 2 months, poring over topographical maps, analyzing elevation profiles, and reviewing every available trip report from the past 3 seasons. Clara even emailed a former guide who'd done it the previous summer, asking about anchor conditions and flow risks. They had timed their permits to avoid peak monsoon windows, and each had practiced ascending techniques in a local climbing gym weeks before the trip. Clara mentioned that the risk seemed manageable. Considering she'd navigated dozens of canyons across the Southwest, her friends conformed. But this time it was different. In the canyons of the Southwest, water doesn't need to fall where you stand. Clara clipped into her rappel line first, testing the anchor and running the rope through her device. Her 3 friends stood above, helmets catching the high desert sun as they waited for her to descend into the shadowed chute below. It was the last moment when everything still felt safe. Halfway down, they heard it, a low murmur at first, like distant wind, but the sound deepened, thickened, became a dull, endless roar that vibrated up through the stone. The friends peered down the canyon's bend. Around the corner, darkness surged forward. A wall of water, thick and brown, slammed into the slot like a freight train of mud. In the space of a heartbeat, calm turned to catastrophe. Clara was suspended 12 feet above the canyon floor when the surge reached her. Her rappel line whipped against the wall and snagged on a jagged ledge. She twisted, trying to unjam it, her dry bag scraping violently against the sandstone. There was no more time for choices, only reaction. She reached for her knife, face pale, eyes wide, but the water hit before she could ascend. The friends above screamed helpless as Clara was thrown sideways by the force. Her harness swung violently and dropped her into the chaos just as the flood crested. She vanished beneath the surface. Her helmet surfaced once, just long enough to strike a protruding rock, then disappeared as her body was pulled into a siphon barely 2 feet wide. Gone in seconds. The others scrambled back from the edge, then moved to a higher ledge trapped by rising water. The canyon below filled like a sealed pipe. They used their phones to call for help, and for 30 minutes all they could do was wait, watching as the flood consumed everything: gear, debris, sound, and hope. A helicopter rescue brought them to safety before the flash flood reached them. Search teams found Clara's body the next morning, lodged beneath a submerged rock shelf over a mile downstream. In the funeral, one of her friends said briefly that Clara always double-checked her gear, triple-checked the forecast, and that she didn't deserve to vanish like that. Orderville remained open, but new signs appeared at its trailhead. Small, weatherproof plaques warning that dry skies don't mean safety. One of them includes a date, July 22, 2020. No name, just the day everything changed for a group of 4 who thought they'd planned for everything. It was October 2nd, 1999. The morning mist clung to the Gauley River like a shroud, swirling just above the surface as if the land itself was holding its breath. The trees were ablaze with autumn's fiery colors, and the river roared, its sound reverberating off the granite cliffs. Near Summersville Dam, rafts were being inflated, helmets tightened, paddles handed out. Among the guides stood Caleb Bishop, a 42-year-old river legend whose presence was as commanding as the water he ruled. Caleb wasn't just a guide, he was the river's master. Before he traded war zones for whitewater, he had been an Army combat diver, trained to survive chaos, to navigate the darkest depths. After leaving the military, he made the Gauley River his home. In 1986, he founded Bishop Expeditions, guiding thousands through the river's treacherous rapids. He knew every bend, every hidden hazard. But the upper Gauley, with its Class 5 rapids and ferocious hydraulics, was a beast even the most seasoned guides approached with respect. This particular morning, Caleb led a group of 4 tourists, 2 couples from Ohio, into the upper Gauley, just after the dam released its daily surge. The river was alive, fast, and powerful. The first few rapids were nothing more than spray and excitement. Caleb's commands were sharp and sure, the raft responding like an extension of his will. For nearly an hour, they navigated with confidence. Then came Pillow Rock, As the raft neared the rapid, Caleb's voice cut through the roar. Lean left. But it was too late. A misjudged stroke, a shift in weight, a small mistake in the chaos of the current was enough to send the raft off balance. The river struck with fury, the raft twisting sideways before flipping completely, spilling all 5 of them into the churning water. The river didn't wait. 2 tourists were immediately sucked downstream, their bodies bouncing off submerged rocks, gasping for air. The others clung to the overturned raft, eyes wide with panic. Caleb surfaced, spitting water, his eyes scanning. He reached for the nearest paddlers, pulling them closer with efficient, practiced hands. He signaled for help, the universal hand signs known only to experienced guides. A safety kayak appeared, pulling the tourists one by one to safety. But Caleb stayed behind. Grabbing the rope line, he wrestled with the raft, trying to flip it upright, knowing every second counted. But the hydraulic at Pillow Rock is a deadly force. The swirling water sucked everything in, trapping anything unfortunate enough to get too close. Caleb, still tethered to the raft, kicked against the current, trying to regain control. Then, just like that, he was gone. There was no splash, no final cry, just a flicker of movement, then nothing. Caleb had disappeared beneath the surface. Whitewater hydraulics are a silent killer. Known for their immense force, these water features are formed when currents crash into submerged rocks, creating a deadly loop that traps anything caught inside. Even the strongest swimmers, and Caleb was among them, stood little chance against the pull if they were caught at the wrong angle. The river, which he had mastered for years, had claimed him. The search began immediately. Rescue teams dropped into the water, their ropes snaking through the turbulent rapids. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their blades fighting the roar of the river. Divers tried to enter the hydraulics base, but the current was too fierce. It wasn't until 48 hours later, when the river finally slowed enough to allow them in, that they found him. Caleb's body was wedged between rocks, trapped beneath a shelf of stone. His life vest was still secured, his hands scratched and raw from fighting for air, but the river had been stronger. After Caleb's death, the Gauley River seemed to lose some of its wild spirit. Tourists, aware of the tragedy, hesitated to face the same rapids that had claimed a legend. Guides spoke of the river feeling different, less chaotic, almost as if it mourned Caleb's absence. His legacy wasn't just in his technical skill, but in his calm, unshakable presence, inspiring others to approach life's chaos with the same fearless grace. It was March 9, 2016. The Bering Sea's winds carried that familiar Arctic bite, sharp enough to cut through even the most carefully laid plans. Brielle and Aaron Torrance, both 26, stood at the edge of their 4th day traversing the ice from Cape Prince of Wales toward the ghosted outline of Chukotka, Russia, unaware of how hostile the terrain was going to be that day. They weren't thrill-seekers, this was calculated. Brielle, once a collegiate rower and now an ultramarathoner, had trained obsessively for this crossing, logging months in altitude chambers, learning ice fracture patterns, sleeping in chest-deep snow pits. Aaron had done the same, matching her stride for stride in the preparation. Their sleds carried rations, GPS, 2 beacons, military-rated survival gear. They'd planned every step, every variable. But the Arctic has a way of creating variables faster than they can be planned for. Around mid-morning, roughly 15 miles from the Alaskan coast, they ran into a wall of broken sea ice, a jagged ridge where massive chunks had piled up and frozen into a wall, stretching nearly half a mile in each direction. It seemed harmless, but there was no way through. They debated briefly, then split to scout, Brielle heading left, Aaron right. The plan was simple. Stay within visual range, radio if needed. Regroup within 20 minutes. Aaron kept his eyes on her for as long as he could, tracking her movement between rising chunks of wind-polished ice. Brielle's red parka was a bright pinprick against the endless white. Then the wind changed. Within minutes, the air thickened and visibility plummeted. A whiteout descended, fast, dense, disorienting. The world became noise and brightness. He called her name into the gale, then he heard a scream. It was Brielle, maybe 100 yards away. Aaron moved fast, skiing low to the ground to follow her trail. For 20 minutes, he hunted through the noise, then he saw it. The tip of her ski sticking up awkwardly near a narrow ice gap. He reached her moments later. She'd fallen through a break between slabs. Her right leg had caught on an upright shard of blue ice, deep puncture, bleeding heavily. Her ski was twisted beneath her body. A red fan of blood painted the snow around her. She was breathing, conscious, and trying to move. He acted immediately. Tourniquet with his belt, sleds dragged side by side to build a windbreak, and emergency blankets wrapped around her. He stacked their gear into an improvised trench. He tried activating the beacon, but there was no signal. It required line of sight, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. Brielle drifted in and out. He pressed their parkas around her and checked her pulse repeatedly, watching it slow in stuttering degrees. But hypothermia doesn't arrive with ceremony, it creeps. During the wait, she stopped shivering. Her eyes closed, then opened less frequently. Eventually, she didn't respond at all. When visibility returned at dusk, he activated the beacon. It was 8 hours before the Coast Guard reached them by air. They found him still crouched over her, shielding her body, but she was declared dead on sight. A year later, Aaron returned alone. He finished the route they'd started, carrying her compass in his parka and her wedding ring in a sealed chest pocket. It was 2014 in the rugged mountains of North Carolina, where dense forests and winding trails promised healing for troubled youth. Trails Carolina, a wilderness therapy program nestled in these ancient hills, marketed itself as a place of transformation, where teenagers could find themselves through the challenges of outdoor living. But beneath this promise of redemption lay darker truths that would eventually claim young lives. Alec Lansing, a 17-year-old with dreams and struggles like any teenager, arrived at the program carrying both hope and hesitation. The facility, spread across the wilderness near Lake Toxaway, employed what they called therapeutic interventions, challenging hikes, primitive camping, and survival skills, meant to build character and resilience. On a bitter November morning, with temperatures dropping and clouds threatening snow, Alec's group set out on what should have been a routine hiking expedition. The autumn leaves had already fallen, leaving the trees bare against a gray sky. Something in Alec snapped that day, perhaps the strict regimen, the isolation, or the mounting pressure. He made a desperate decision to flee from the group. The mountains of North Carolina can be unforgiving, especially to those unfamiliar with their terrain. As Alec ran, he entered a maze of ridges and ravines, where every path looked the same and disorientation could prove fatal. The search began immediately, but the vastness of the wilderness worked against rescuers. For 2 weeks, search teams combed the mountains, their hopes diminishing with each passing day. When they finally found Alec, the scene told a tragic story. His body lay at the bottom of a gorge in Jackson County, his clothes frozen to his flesh by the mountain's cruel embrace. X-rays revealed a fractured left hip, evidence of a fatal fall. The medical examiner's verdict was clear. Hypothermia had claimed him after the injury left him immobile in the freezing temperatures. The investigation that followed exposed troubling patterns. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services discovered that staff had failed to follow basic supervision protocols, subjecting Alec to what they termed neglect and harm. The program was fined $112,000, but money couldn't bring back a lost son. Yet Trails Carolina continued operating. Between 2010 and 2019, state inspections painted a disturbing picture: 50 deficiencies, including 10 citations for improper medication handling, and 4 violations for improper use of seclusion, physical restraint, and isolation. Each citation represented a potential tragedy waiting to happen. That tragedy struck again in February 2024, when a 12-year-old boy died within his first 24 hours at the camp. Like Alec before him, he had been sent there with hopes of help, but found only harm. This death finally forced action. The program was shut down, its license revoked, and all remaining children removed from its care. The mountains still stand, indifferent to the human suffering they've witnessed. The trails where Alec spent his final days continue to wind through the wilderness, but they now carry the weight of these preventable losses. Former staff members have come forward, speaking of inadequate training, dangerous practices, and warnings ignored. These tragedies forced a national conversation about wilderness therapy programs, about the fine line between challenging troubled youth and endangering them. The deaths of Alec Lansing and the young boy in 2024 serve as stark reminders that good intentions, when not backed by proper oversight and care, can lead to devastating consequences. Today, the empty facilities of Trails Carolina stand as a warning to similar programs across the country. In the end, the very wilderness meant to heal became the setting for irreversible loss, leaving families to wonder how helping their children led to such heartbreak. It was a bright August morning in Yosemite National Park, where granite peaks rose sharply against the clear California sky. In Tuolumne Meadows, climbers prepared for another day on the park's legendary rock formations, their gear clinking softly as they moved. Among them was Brad Parker, setting out for a climb that would mark both the highest point of his joy and the unexpected end of his life. Brad was a 36-year-old from Sebastopol, California, known for his skill as a climber and his dedication as a yoga instructor. He had already conquered some of Yosemite's most demanding routes, including the sheer face of Half Dome. Whether on rock or in the studio, he approached every challenge with discipline and a deep love for movement. That morning, Brad and his girlfriend Janie Dial ascended Cathedral Peak, a towering granite spire that stood over 10,900 feet above sea level. At the summit, with Yosemite's breathtaking landscape stretching in every direction, he proposed. She accepted. Overwhelmed with happiness, Brad later told his father it was the best day of his life. The couple soon descended, but the day was not over for Brad. Still energized, he decided to attempt a solo climb of Matthey's Crest, a thin, jagged granite ridge known for its exposed 500-foot drop-offs. The route, rated 5.7, was frequently climbed without ropes by experienced mountaineers. With its long, continuous ridgeline, many considered soloing or simul-climbing the most efficient way to navigate it. By late afternoon, Brad reached a notch between the north and south summits, where he crossed paths with other climbers. They later recalled that he appeared dehydrated and mentioned having cramps, even asking if they planned to rappel down. Despite his condition, he showed no visible signs of distress and continued his ascent toward the north summit. Moments later, he disappeared from view. 20 minutes passed before the stillness of the mountains was shattered by the sound of falling rock. Brad had fallen. An investigation later revealed that he had strayed from the standard route, attempting to traverse a narrow 10-foot wide fin of steep, rarely traveled rock on the west face of the ridge. This more challenging, unstable path, with untested handholds and loose rock, proved fatal. He plummeted approximately 300 feet down the west side of the ridge. Climbers at the base, including an off-duty paramedic, rushed to the scene, but it was too late. The remote location and fading daylight forced park rangers to postpone the recovery operation until morning, when his body was retrieved by helicopter short haul. The investigation by NPS Ranger McGahey concluded that fatigue likely played a role in the accident. A potential rock scar, about 6 inches long near a crack, suggested a handhold might have broken, though this couldn't be confirmed. After summiting Cathedral Peak earlier that day, the additional exertion, combined with dehydration and possible route-finding confusion, may have pushed Brad beyond his limits. The tragedy sent waves through Yosemite's climbing community. Brad was remembered not just for his skill on the rock, but for his kindness, his love of the outdoors, and his work with Habitat for Humanity. His family honored his adventurous spirit by spreading his ashes in 3 places he held dear: Tuolumne Meadows, the Pacific Ocean near Sonoma, and the shores of Kauai, Hawaii. Climbers still traverse Matthey's Crest, drawn to its beauty and challenge. But Brad's story remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that even for the strongest, the mountains demand respect. It was July 13, 2022, in Buckhorn Canyon, Colorado, a place rich with family history and cherished traditions. Lisa Schilling, a 36-year-old 4th-grade teacher at Dean Elementary, arrived at her family's favorite camping spot with her 12-year-old daughter, Lily Arguello, and several other family members. The area, nestled within the Cameron Peak fire burn scar, had witnessed decades of unforgettable moments for the family. They planned to stay for a week in their permanent camping trailer, a comfortable setup they had relied on for years at this location. Lisa was preparing to transition to Bear Creek Elementary, while Lily, about to enter 8th grade at Deer Creek Middle School, eagerly anticipated her 13th birthday on July 27th. Also joining them was Annette Vasquez, Lisa's sister-in-law, who had spent countless summers in Buckhorn Canyon and knew the area intimately. For Annette, this place was more than a camping retreat. It was where the family had introduced spouses, raised children, and escaped the distractions of daily life. While Lisa and her daughter stayed in the familiar family trailer, Annette had set up in another trailer nearby, ready to soak in the peaceful surroundings. Despite the area's history of post-wildfire flooding, the family embraced the rugged landscape, hoping this visit would create another chapter of cherished memories in the canyon they all held dear. On Friday, July 15th, the weather shifted. Rain began falling, causing the nearby creek to rise several inches. The National Weather Service in Boulder reported that a strong thunderstorm had produced between 1 and 2 inches of rain within a devastatingly short period. The burn scar from the Cameron Peak fire had left the terrain vulnerable, unable to absorb water as it once had. At approximately 5 p.m., the Larimer County Sheriff's Office Communications Center began receiving multiple reports of flash flooding in the Glen Haven and Crystal Mountain areas. Deputies encountered moderate flooding in Glen Haven and significant flooding in the Crystal Mountain and Buckhorn areas. Private bridges and culverts had been washed away, complicating access to affected locations. Buckhorn Road was destroyed near mile marker 25, forcing deputies to utilize Larimer County Sheriff's Office Communications Center Humvees to reach areas beyond the washout. Additional search teams proceeded on foot, methodically checking affected areas as reports of stranded residents continued to arrive. The combination of intense rainfall and fire-scarred land had created perfect conditions for disaster. Vasquez, who was staying in her own trailer about 50 yards from Lisa's, later recounted the moment everything changed. A loud rumbling echoed through the campsite, drawing their attention to the creek. What they saw approaching was a wall of destruction. Trees, rocks, mud, and water surging toward them with unstoppable force. The trailer, where Lisa, Lily, and their 2 dogs had taken shelter, stood directly in its path. The flood's power proved overwhelming. Within moments, the trailer was swept away and overwhelmed by the torrent. The force of the water carried the structure downstream, tumbling it through the debris-filled current. Lisa, Lily, and their pets remained trapped inside as the floodwaters filled their temporary home. By 7:30 p.m., rescuers made a grim discovery. They found Lisa and Lily's bodies just over half a mile from their campsite on Calico Court. The medical examiner would later confirm what seemed apparent. Mother and daughter had drowned when their trailer filled with floodwater. Their 2 dogs had also perished in the tragedy. The devastation extended beyond the immediate loss of life. The Cameron Peak fire's burn scar had created conditions that amplified the flood's destructive power. The fire, which had raged through the area in 2020, left soil unable to absorb water effectively, turning even moderate rainfall into potential catastrophe. Lisa and Lily became the 5th and 6th victims claimed by flash floods in the burn scar area. In response to the tragedy, the Larimer Emergency Telephone Authority implemented comprehensive changes to their alert system. They expanded warnings to include landline, cell phone calls, and email alerts for all flash flood warnings impacting burn scars in Larimer County. The new system, accessible through nocoalert.org, offered free alerts for flash floods and other emergencies, with officials encouraging residents and visitors to maintain multiple communication methods for receiving emergency notifications. Roosevelt National Forest Supervisor Monty Williams addressed the tragedy, emphasizing the devastating impact on the community and the continued risks posed by burn scar flooding. The Jefferson County Public School District mourned the loss of a dedicated educator, while Lily's absence left a void at Deer Creek Middle School. The community rallied to support Lisa's husband, Aaron Arguello. A GoFundMe page established to help with expenses quickly exceeded expectations, raising nearly $144,000 of its $25,000 goal by July 19th. The outpouring of support reflected the impact Lisa and Lily had on those around them, particularly as the family dealt with other recent losses. The flash flood that claimed Lisa and Lily served as a stark reminder of nature's power, particularly in areas recovering from wildfires. Their deaths highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by communities near burn scars, where the land's ability to absorb water remains compromised years after flames are extinguished. The tragedy led to enhanced emergency notification systems and renewed emphasis on preparedness in areas affected by previous wildfires. The canyon still draws visitors, but the events of July 15th added another layer to its history, a reminder that even familiar places can harbor unexpected dangers, especially when natural disasters leave lasting scars on the landscape. The implementation of improved warning systems stands as a legacy of Lisa and Lily's tragic final camping trip, aimed at preventing future losses in Colorado's vulnerable burn scar areas. Thanks for watching. These stories show how fast life can change in a single moment. Click here for more real events that took a shocking turn.